Hey guys, Evan Sherman back here again. Today we're going to talk about music notation, specifically how to recognize notes on the staff, some tips and tricks for trying to figure out the notes quickly and without thinking too hard about it. I think that with a couple of little tips, you're going to be doing this in no time. So why don't we jump right in and see how it goes, okay? So what we've got here is what we call the grand staff. Okay, let me break that down a little bit for you. First of all, the staff is basically this right here. This is a staff. These 5 lines and 4 spaces, and this is a staff down here. Another set of 5 lines and 4 spaces. Together, when we sort of beam them together with this fancy thing here, we get what's called the grand staff, the big staff. Okay. And these fancy looking shapes right here, these are called clefs, and different looking clefs basically just represent different ranges of pitch. Okay, so that's how I want you to think of this. This clef down here tends to be associated with the left hand of the piano, or really any bass ranged instrument. So that's like a bass guitar, or maybe a stand-up bass, or a cello, or a tuba, any of those like really low instruments, okay? And there's a lot others, that's just a couple. And up here we have what's called the treble clef, which is usually the right hand of the piano, or you'll see guitar music written in this, in a lot of the woodwinds, and this is probably the most common clef that you see around. But there's also even other clefs that aren't pictured here that represent different ranges of pitch and are standard for other instruments that we're not going to be messing with today. So, anyways, how do we recognize music? How do we recognize music on the grand staff? Well, that's what we're going to answer today. I want to start with the bass clef here. The bass clef. It's pretty easy to recognize notes, okay? In fact, all we really need to know is one note, and I'll tell you why. If we know that that bottom space is A, we could just use our pre-existing knowledge of the alphabet to figure out all the other notes in the staff, okay? So what do I mean by that? Well, if that's A, this line right here is B. The space is C, the line is D, space is E, line is F, space is G, line is A. Okay, so I'm sure you can see what's happening here. As I go from line to space to line to space to line to space to line to space, as I'm working my way up the ranks of the staff like that, I'm actually just moving through the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Okay, a lot of times when people learn to read music, they learn the spaces, and then they learn the lines. And when they do it that way, that almost seems like sort of random subsets of letters. But this is really what's happening behind the scenes. This is really it. We just have the alphabet. As we go higher towards the ceiling, we're moving farther through the alphabet. And as we move up the alphabet, the pitch is also getting higher and higher and higher. So for instance, this is A, B, C, D, E. You can hear how the notes are getting higher and higher as the alphabet also progresses through. Okay, it's also worth pointing out that when you get to the end of the musical alphabet, the last letter is G, it just starts back over again. A, okay, and then B, C, continuing on like that, okay? So if that's the case, what do you think this would be like right here? What do you think a letter beneath A would be? Well, if we go past G and it takes us to A, well, if we go in the other direction, if we passed A, it would take us to G. Okay, so this bottom note down here would be G, all right? So we've basically got our entire staff right there. So you can already start to answer the question of what note is this, what note is that. You can already start to do it just by knowing your alphabet and knowing where A is on the bass clef. Okay, now what a lot of people tend to do is they memorize the spaces and the lines. I sort of mentioned that earlier. I like to just stick with the spaces. Okay, so we end up with this ace G. And then, if you're trying to figure out what note this is in between A and C, I usually just think, well, what's one up from A? What's one letter up from A? It's B, right? If I was trying to figure this note here out, I would just say, what's one letter up from E? What is it? What do you think? The answer is A, B, C, D, E, F. That's right. It would be an F. Okay. So it can really be that easy. That's my recommended route, is memorize those 4 notes, A, C, E, G, and then just use those to sort of fill in the gaps. Okay. You fill in the gaps between just by going up a letter from the space beneath it. Okay. So that's how you end up with B. Whoops. With B here, and D here, and F there, and A up there. Okay, that's how we can kind of fill it in. And don't forget about this G down here as well. Okay. All right, good. What about the treble clef? Treble clef. Same thing. I'm going to start off just by writing all the letters so you can see how they all kind of fall onto the staff. The bottom line in the treble clef, this is a different subset of letters, still just going through the alphabet, but we're starting on a different letter this time, okay? So the bottom line here is E, then we get into our first space, which is F, and then we're just continuing through the musical alphabet. That's G, switching back to A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, sorry, my handwriting's atrocious. There we go, F. Okay, so same deal, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. You can see how it is just progressing through that musical alphabet. Again, the farther we get through the alphabet, the higher the pitches are going. Okay, and same deal here. I tend to just kind of stick with the spaces and use those to fill in the gaps. So look what happens when I do that. Oh, look at that. It spells a word that I can easily memorize. Face. It spells the word face. So same deal. If I wanted to know what note this is right here, I would just say, what's one letter up from F? And I get my answer. It's G. Okay, so I know that this note is G. Easy peasy, man. Easy peasy. So really using this, you can already start to answer the question of, like, you know, any of the notes on the staff. So let's try a couple, okay? Let's go through the motions together. What letter is this, the second space in the treble clef? What do you think? Well, we have a mechanism for figuring this out. We know that the spaces in the treble clef spell the word face. So if I just kind of go from the bottom up and start spelling my word face, I can see that it's an A. I get to that second space, that second letter. That's your answer. It's A. Okay. How about this one? Oh, same deal. F, A, C. Oh, okay, that one's a C. Easy enough. What if we came down here and did the same spot? Is that also a C? No, it's not, right? Because we have a different subset of letters. Same order, starting in a different spot, okay? So here we have ace G, right? Ace G. And same deal, I can see, okay, it's on that third space, so I know that this is an E. Okay, I can figure this out pretty quickly just by using that. Tell me, what note is that? Well, A, C, E, G. Yes, it's the G. Very good. Okay, let's get into some slightly trickier ones. What note is this on the line? Well, same deal, pretty much. Except really what I'm kind of looking for is, what note is that? And then I'm going to go up one. Okay, so that's an A, right? F, A. And then I go up a letter to get to that line, and that's B. Okay, so this note is B. What about this one down here on that line? Well, same deal. I go A, C, E, and then up one letter to F. That would be an F, okay? So, not too bad, right? Not too bad. There are a couple notes that we're going to bump into that sort of don't get covered by this system that I've already laid out. So I want to briefly touch on those, okay? So first, the first example that you're likely to see is some notes that sort of fall in this range of the staff, okay? So that's sort of like some notes between the staff. So first of all, there's something I want to talk about called ledger lines. Ledger lines are sort of these temporary extensions of the staff. Okay, so for instance, if I wanted a note that was like maybe a bit lower than this bottom line, this E here, I could actually extend the staff like this. Just put a little line, and then I can draw a note on that line. So this note right here was actually called middle C, middle C. And honestly, this is probably the one note I don't have like a great trick in terms of memorizing it. And I think the reason is because it's just such a common note that most people end up memorizing it without too much conscious effort towards it. But if you're not familiar with this note, I would definitely recommend kind of taking a good hard look at it right now and going, okay, middle C, make sure it sticks. You want to be able to recognize this. Okay. Now, what's a little weird about middle C is that we can actually draw it or write it in both hands. So for instance, it can be found like this beneath the treble clef. It can also be found like this above the bass clef. Okay, so these two notes are the same note. They're both middle C. They're both middle C. The one over here is just played in the right hand, and the one down here is played in the left hand. But these are the same note. They're both this note right here, middle C. Middle C, okay? So, like I said, if you're seeing this note for the first time, make sure you know it very well because we're going to be using it a lot. Okay, now, beyond that, there's also a note like right here, okay, sitting just above middle C, which, if you've been really paying attention to what I'm saying, you could probably figure out what note that would be. What note would be just up from middle C? Well, we just use our alphabet, A, B, C, D. Okay, so that's one way to figure this note out. My little trick for this is to just remember that it sort of dangles off the bottom of the treble clef. So D dangles, D dangles. All right, and likewise, we also have a note that looks like this. This is like on our bass clef. Okay, and same deal. This is sitting just beneath middle C, right? So we can probably figure out pretty easily that the note would be B, because that's the letter just right before C. But another trick that I use sometimes is to sort of picture like a little bird, right? Like, I don't know if you can sort of see it. I'm certainly no artist, okay? But I picture like B like a bird like sort of perched on top of a fence. That's the goal here. This is like the top of our fence. We got our little birdie. There's his beak and his eyes. Okay, like I said, not the best artist, but good. Okay, so we've got B, middle C, and D. B like a bird, D dangles, C, just memorize it. Okay. Okay, lastly, we've got ledger lines that can go above the treble clef, extend it even higher than it would normally go. And we have ledger lines beneath the bass clef, extending even lower than it would normally go. Okay, so let me show you what those would look like. Okay, so for instance, we could maybe write a super high note like way up here. That's like a really high E up there. And the way I know that really quickly without thinking too hard about it is because we get another mnemonic that we can use over here, which is ace. Kind of like what we had in the bass clef, right? We had A, ace, G we used, right, for the bass clef. So sort of like that, okay? And same deal, except now we're looking at lines, not spaces. I want to point that out, okay? So the lines, the ledger lines themselves spell A-C-E from low to high. All right, and same deal. If I was trying to figure out like a note between A and C, I would just think, what's one up from A? What's the answer, guys? B. That's right, it's B. Okay, so that's how you can sort of figure out those ledger lines way up there. And what's kind of wacky is we can take what we just learned here and immediately apply it all the way down beneath, oops, sorry, let me zoom out a bit, beneath the bass clef as well. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 bass ledger lines here. And same deal, A, C, and E. Okay, and if I put like a note between C and E, for instance, down there, I would know it's a D because that's one up from C. Just using the notes that I do know to figure out the notes that I don't know. That's always been my trick. Use what you know to figure out what you don't know. Okay, that's something that's doable in music. Okay, so this covers like a pretty vast range of, you know, the staff. Okay, I would think that if you were paying attention to all this stuff and it's all making sense to you, you're probably not going to bump into many notes that you're not going to be able to recognize at this point. Okay, we still haven't talked about sharps and flats and that kind of thing. We'll get into that in another video. But for now, I'm hoping that this was enlightening, and hopefully you're starting to get an idea of how easy it can be to recognize the specific pitches on the staff. Please drop any questions you've got in the comments. I'm looking forward to answering as many as I can. And with all that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.